All right, can you hear me? Great. How you guys doing today? Super great. So let me just give you a quick background on myself first. I wanted to get into this business way back when, in the 1970s. Many of you were not even born then. I was out of college and wanted to do one thing in life, be a play-by-play sports announcer. That was all I ever dreamt of being. So make a long story short, I wanted to do the games for St. John's University in New York, where I was raised, and I wanted to do their basketball games. And believe it or not, back then, in the 1970s, St. John's could not get its games on radio. And I went over to the athletic director, who was a great man, and he said, if you can get them on radio, or get us on radio, we would be happy to allow you to do the game. So I started knocking on every radio station's door in all of New York and was thrown out of every one of them. Finally found a small station on Long Island, and the station said, okay, we'll run the games for you. And I thought I died and went to heaven, and you can do the games. And the next thing you know is I was sitting in the guest chair in this general manager of the radio station's office. He says one thing. He turns around into his credenza, reaches behind into his credenza, and he pulls out this thick yellow pages, and he drops it right in front of me. He says, you know, if you're going to have to do the games, we're going to have to get some sponsors to support it. I said, okay, well, how do you do that? Where do you start? And he says, there you go, the yellow pages. And that was the start of my sales career. And I did that, and it worked out pretty well. After about a year or two, there was this big company, again, in the media side of things, called Katz Communications. They're the biggest station rep in America. And I said, you know, if I can sell and I can announce, let me get a job that I could really make some money in. So I went to work for Katz. We represented radio and television stations all across the country. They had tons of stations that had a lot of sports, and eventually I ran the entire division while I was moonlighting doing St. John's basketball. St. John's then joins the Big East. We get on a big radio station in New York, and people are getting to know me, and at the same time I'm knocking on doors while selling. So after a number of years, I decided to maybe do something else. And I got the rights to the Knicks and Rangers in New York and get their games on radio. And I did that, and I did all the sales for them, so I made some extra money. Then one day, while I was doing the Knicks, the radio announcer didn't show up. And the guy said, the fellow who ran the Garden at the time, Bob Gutkowski, said, Halby, why don't you do the game tonight? And I said, oh my God, the NBA, it's here. So I did the game, and this fellow kept missing more games. And after a while, I said, you know what? If I can ever get a job where I'm doing the NBA games full-time and doing sales, that's the ultimate. So one day I come home and I tell my wife, who's a pediatrician, I got a job. It's in Miami, Florida. And I'm living up in New York, and she's teaching medicine at Cornell. And I said, we're moving to Miami, where I've just gotten a job as the radio voice of the Miami Heat. So we moved down there. She's kicking and screaming. And I do the Heat games for 6 years. The ownership changes. I leave, and I go to work for a company called Westwood One. Any of you have heard of Westwood One? I think all of you in the sports business should know who they are. Big sports radio network. Long story short, I run the network for them. So now I've got Monday Night Football under my aegis, the rights negotiations, hiring of the talent, the whole deal. 2008, that company also changes ownership. I'm still in Florida, okay? And I end up opening up my own consultancy. And I'm helping MLB, which had just launched its MLB network. I've done work for ESPN, DirecTV, Cumulus, CBS, and a bunch of others. And that pretty much brings me up to the present moment. A couple other things about my background. I have done a lot of writing. I have a great interest in the history of broadcast sports. I've done pieces for SI, for USA Today, and others on the history of broadcast sports. So you name any city, any announcer, you can challenge me. I know who they are, what they do, if they're any good, at least whether I think they're any good. And can probably tell you half their sponsors as well. So the first book I did was on broadcast sports history. This book, which was my second book, called The Fundamentals of Sports Media and Sponsorship Sales, Developing New Accounts. Because I wouldn't be here today if I couldn't get new accounts, because that's where it is all about. The other book I did many years ago was on the history of broadcast sports in New York, called Sports on New York Radio, a play-by-play history. So sort of an unabashed pitch here for my book, but I think you'll really enjoy it because this takes you step by step with a lot of the stories, some of which I will share today. So let's talk about three things that, in my mind, is required to be a good seller. And I'm going to go through this very, very quickly, and then we'll talk about being in the trenches. There are three things. The first thing is hunger. Cannot be taught. If you don't have it in here, and you don't know that you can sell, I know I hired a lot of salespeople. And if they sat there and said, you know, I'm thinking about my career, I'm thinking about sales, immediately, never hire this guy, right? You've got to want to do it. If you don't want to do it, you don't get hired, you can't sell, because we know the difficulties, the frustrations of day-to-day sales. Organization, absolutely imperative, but that can be taught. I'm a believer in logging every phone call every day, coding your emails, right? So organization can be taught, hunger cannot be taught. The third thing, a nose of where to go. That's the vapor of experience. And a nose of where to go to get your next lead. Intuition, that comes within time, that comes through experience, and you get better and better at it. And those are the three things you need. And I go to a lot of schools, and I do it for free, and I try to teach a lot of these young people who are getting into sales. I go through each one and what each takes, but you guys are all professional sellers. Every day when I start, this is an old PC, but this is the way I work. I have all my contacts, I have all my inbox with various information, and then now I've got a program. Every day, all the calls I make, LM, if I've left a message, if I've heard back, what we've said, pull anything up immediately. You guys all have that at this point. Back then, no one did this. I hired a lot of good people who have been a heck of a lot more successful than I'll ever be, and I forced them to do it. To this day, they thank me, including a guy who about a month ago was appointed president of the Washington Redskins, Brian LaFemina. I hired him into his first sales job at Madison Square Garden, and we're very good friends, and that's one of the things he makes his people do, logging every call. Another guy who's the CEO of Hulu, Randy Freer, another guy I hired into sales, they still thank me for this one thing. Okay, I had heard one of the presentations before, and I want to talk about this, if I can, for a moment. Selling, for the most part, cold calling, developing new accounts. When you develop a new account and you get a major hit, they parade you around. You're like the hero of the day. It makes your career. If you can get a new account, people love you, and the fulfillment is just indescribable, right? It's happened to everybody in this room. Out of all the frustrations, when you just feel like you're crawling in darkness, right? You just feel you'll never get it done. But when you get that big hit, it'll spur you forever. So, here's the point. when you begin to make a call, and before you make the call, you need tons of preparation. How many times have you gone out in the street, you're driving in your car, and you think, gee, here's a company, I've got to call them and see if they'd have an interest in a partnership. Before you do that, the worst thing you can do is call that company without doing your research. You've got to know more about their business than you do your own, even if it's for 2 tickets to 12 games. You've got to understand their mission as well as your own. Or even if it's a doctor's office, if it's an accounting office, if it's a well-to-do person in the community, you have to understand what makes them tick more than anything else. And you've got to be totally prepared before you make that call. Now you're out trying to reach them. Now, this is what I always believe in, and I heard the bit before with the third party. You begin like a coach starting a basketball game. You have X number of timeouts, and you have X number of subs you can bring in and out of the game. Here are the things that I call them communication tools. You can begin with a command to action email, not opening an email by saying, hi, I'm Jerry Smith, I'm with the San Diego Padres, I've been here 3 years, and I'd like to sell you 2 tickets to 81 games. That's not going to work, right? Command to action. I will be in your office tomorrow at 11 a.m. Can I see you? That makes that person respond to you. You're asking that person a question, brevity, to the point, 4 lines, you got a better chance of them getting back to you. So command to action email. A brief introductory phone call, leaving a message, or even seeing your phone number come in. Now, by the way, the damn thing now it's been happening for the last 20 years where you can see who's calling. That was really meant as a shield. But that shield, unfortunately, has become a sword. They see who's calling, they'll never answer. It's supposed to protect, kills you. But anyhow, a brief introductory phone call. Letter by your coach or by your on-air talent or somebody known. That's another means by which you can communicate to a new prospect, right? I mean, you're talking to a prospect about a partnership, about hospitality, about a big expenditure, okay? Luxury, premium, whatever it might be. And you have a follow-up personalized letter coming out from a coach as a follow-up, right? That's another means of communication. Now, your fixed number of follow-ups, you really have a fixed number like a coach has timeouts. So you've got to sort of establish that dialogue. And I like talking about this. It's called, you communicate in measured intervals. You can't call a guy every day, get sick of you, right? So you got to have pleasant persistence and do so in measured intervals. And you begin to establish a dialogue. You then have an opportunity to present your core competency, what you can do as a company, as a team. Social media posts. How many of you guys post your stories, your ideas, your views of the world, your views of the team? Begin to do that. Writing is a skill you can develop, and if you create a blog, it's amazing and who will see it and how they respond. So you guys ought to work on that. So thoughts for the week. What happened with your team this week? Good things that have happened. That's another way to communicate. Invites to sponsor functions. Handwritten notes, right? You keep sending emails, the scroll keeps getting lower and lower. Your prospect will not see it, read it. But if you send a handwritten note with a thank you or a plea, whatever it might be, it will arrive and sit on a person's desk. Client endorsement letters. Some of your other ticket holders, some of your other partners with an endorsement that how well it's worked for them, right? That's as good as anything you could find anywhere. Pertinent articles that might have appeared somewhere online or in print that you can send out. occasionally giving away tickets, other goodies and trinkets that you can follow up with, mock visuals, right? How many of you have done this? You're talking to somebody about a pretty good sponsorship, so you go down to your friend who's operating the scoreboard and say, can you say, we'd love to have Mazda as a luxury box owner here at the stadium. And they put it up, you take a picture of it, and you send it out to everybody at Mazda, right? It's another way of what we call mock visual. So these are all, and there are many others, but these are all ways that you can communicate, and you've got to sort of use them in measured intervals, because the process of just getting from step A to step B till you get that appointment, you're going to need a lot of time and a lot of patience. And these are the ways you communicate, and that's something you own, that you dictate, that you use every single day. Dealing with emotions and gathering your strength. This is really probably the most difficult thing that you guys have to deal with every single day, because we all deal with setbacks every day. And unless you can handle that, you're in the wrong business. But if you can, you're going to make tons of money. Believe me. So you've got to overcome adversity on tough days, and there are going to be a lot more tough days than there will be good days. And that you have to accept the fact going into this job that there will be failure, okay? That there will be a rejection or two or many, but they're all a prelude to good things that will happen. And you can't allow setbacks in any way to temper your enthusiasm. Every single day you're out there, you're making calls, you're getting closer. Now here's an idea of some people whose names you'll know who had setbacks. Frank Gehry, you guys know who he is, great architect, like Frank Lloyd Wright, right up there. Frank Gehry, Canadian fellow, went to the architectural school at USC. His professor told him he'll never make it. Never make it. Guess what? He made it. Michael Jordan, you guys know, his high school coach dropped him, said he wasn't good enough, put him back in the JV. Look what happened to him. Christopher Columbus wanted to sail for the New World. The kings and queens of Spain and Portugal, they all turned him down. He persisted. He got here. Dr. Seuss, we've all read his books or read the books ourselves. He went to about 1,000 publishers before they decided they'll take it and print it. Gil Hodges, an old timer, but he played for the old Brooklyn Dodgers, one of the great hitters of all time. In the World Series of 1952, was I believe his first World Series, he hit something like 2 for 38. And they wanted to string him up from the highest tree in Brooklyn. But you know what? He had a great career afterwards. So rejection, don't let that stand in the way. FedEx went into business in 1970. They couldn't even make payroll. Southwest Airlines, a similar situation. Even when ESPN started in 1979, people laughed at them. They said the big networks, the line networks, have all the rights to all the big events. They did pretty well, and the guys who started at a early position there, guys like Chris Berman and Bob Lee, they did very well for themselves, while everybody said they'll never make it. You got to look in the mirror, and you got to believe in what you're doing. And you got to say to yourself, I can make it. Because there's one thing about sports that you're selling. There's a sense of community. It bonds a community. When the Philadelphia Eagles earlier this year won the Super Bowl championship, everybody loved the Eagles. I know in my years, there were other people selling for television stations, radio stations, one team or another team. They're selling a product. But when you sell sports, everybody loves your team, especially when they win, right? So that is a very special opportunity. And for every team, there's a niche. If you're in New England and you're selling the Patriots, of course, they're a Super Bowl team virtually every year. But if you're selling Harvard football, there's also a niche by which you're selling Harvard, higher education, upper echelon. So every team, every sport, every opportunity presents a feature that you can go out and sell in the marketplace. Now, let's talk about learning from leaders. I talked about handwritten notes. You guys know Chuck Todd? Anybody in this room know who he is? He moderates Meet the Press every Sunday for NBC. Well, I heard Chuck Todd when my daughter got her MBA at the University of Miami a couple of years ago. Chuck Todd was the speaker, a keynote speaker, and he talked about how he grew at NBC. One of the things he did, handwritten notes. Again, those things have a way of just sticking to somebody's ribs. They got a nice handwritten note. David Stern, the great commissioner of the NBA, never ever in my life will I forget this. When Marv Albert was celebrating his 25th anniversary as the announcer for the Knicks, they had a party at the Garden, and I was invited. I brought one of my clients, Jim Gordon was his name, and he was head of advertising for Chevron. They were a sponsor of the Knicks, and Stern is working the room, talking to everybody, and I knew him, at least I had a nodding acquaintance with him, and I said, Mr. Commissioner, I'd like to introduce you to Jim Gordon. He's one of the sponsors with the Knicks. Before I can even get my last word out, he cut me off, and he starts pitching, I swear to God, pitching Jim Gordon at the time of Gulf Oil, now Chevron. He starts pitching him to become a national NBA sponsor. Before Gordon, the client, could even respond to Stern, Stern was on his way walking to the next guy. He was working the room. I'll never forget it. He took every opportunity, his elevator pitch, and that was a memorable experience for Gordon, so it helped me. I introduced him to the commissioner, but the commissioner got a pitch in right away, try to get a local client to become a national client. Ewan Kaufman, people know that name? The owner, the original owner of the Kansas City Royals. I believe it's still in his family. He made his money by marketing vitamins back when vitamins were not popular in the 1950s. And you know what he did? He had a job that was harder than any of what you guys do. He went door to door from one doctor to the next, and he sold this little vitamin. It was called Vicom. And he kept going in and showing that he believed in this vitamin so much, he kept popping them. From one doctor to the next, he must have popped about 100 of them during the day, just to show that he believes in it. There was one problem. Vicom was also a laxative. But this guy believed in himself. Now, Chesley Sullenberger, you know who he is? Sully. He landed that plane in 2009 in the Hudson when America really needed a little boost. We were in the throes of terrible financial headwinds at the time. You may remember that. And there one day I'm in my office and I'm watching CNN and I see this bloody plane land in the Hudson River when it's like 10 degrees. This guy was amazing. Those passengers were very lucky because Sully was an expert, an absolute expert on landing planes in water. And he landed that plane in the Hudson. Great story, and of course now he's a multimillionaire. And it just shows you, have an expertise. One day I'm in a Japanese restaurant, I mentioned my wife's a physician, and all of a sudden I hear this guy getting, he was dying. He was choking. And my wife went over, Heimlich maneuver, and saved the guy's life. Any expertise that you can have, imagine you save the life of a potential client. They'll give you any order you ever wanted. Good to have that. Good to have an expertise, even if it's just more than something sales. I want to talk about some of the great cold calls in the history of sports. And I'm going to talk about a few of them because these are all inspirational. I was involved in a couple of them, and others I know about and I write about in my book. First one was when I was a kid seller at Katz. There was a guy named Gil Miller who was my supervisor. And I get an appointment through hard work with the president of an ad agency. We were trying to sell the Kansas City Royals, which we represented, and he had the account for Getty Oil. It's an ice cold day. We leave our office, scarf, winter coat, cap, the whole deal. We come up to the agency. The receptionist said, "Mr. Fogel will be right with you, gentlemen." Within 2 minutes, we're ushered down to this guy's office. Bevy of activity, big, important guy. We sit down, I take my coat off, I take my scarf off, I take my gloves off. Gil sits down, he takes his coat off, and he keeps his scarf on, and he keeps his bloody gloves on. And he goes through this entire pitch. Meanwhile, people in that office are poking their heads into Bruce Fogel's office. They needed him for one thing or another. We were just sellers. Fogel kept pushing them away, and he kept focusing on our pitch. We're all done. We leave. I'm like embarrassed. This guy, I bring him down. He's sitting in the guy's office with his gloves on. And I leave, and I said, "Gil, why did you do that?" He says, "Bruce Fogel. He's a pretty busy guy." I said, "Yes, he is." He said, "He didn't take his eyes off me. He listened to every word I said." Now, I could never do that, but it taught me a lesson. You've got to be a little different. Be yourself, but be different. That was Getty Oil. And by the way, we got the order, and I think they're still a sponsor of the Royals. Barclays Bank, the Barclays Arena in Brooklyn, that was a cold call. Barclays was a cold call. That's how and would you ever have gone after Barclays? Barclays, a New England, an England institution. They don't even have a branch bank in the U.S. Okay. How much more time have I got? Huh? Okay. All right. So I will leave you with one story then. These are, by the way, every one of these are in the book because this is something you do. But I will leave you with the Wrangler story. I'll tell the Wrangler story and then I'll call it a day. I'm in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I'm making a presentation to Lincoln Financial. Call didn't go well. I leave, I'm disappointed. I'm in the car headed back to the airport. As I'm driving, I see a little sign on top of a marquee. It says Wrangler. I didn't even know that Wrangler was based in Greensboro. I said, you know what? I always try to end every trip or every day with a good phone call or a good sales call. And I walked into the Wrangler office unannounced without an appointment, and I asked the receptionist if I could see the head of marketing. This was 15 years ago. We had internet, but we didn't have smartphones. I couldn't figure out the name of that person. So the woman said, "Let me see if I could see you, if Mr. Cliff will see you." She calls his office. The secretary says he doesn't see anybody without an appointment. I said, "Do me a favor, try again." She looks at me sheepishly, but she does it anyhow. And she says, "We'll get back to you. Sit down here in the receptionist area." I sit down. About half an hour later, Mark Cliff comes walking down. He says, "I don't see anybody without an appointment, but I'm going out for a cigarette break if you want to join me for 10 minutes. It was a bone-chilling day in Greensboro. I'm outside on the porch of that little park area in front of the building. He's blowing smoke into my nose. It's bone-chilling. And I'm giving him this elevator pitch on why he should be buying Westwood One's NFL radio. And I saw I was wasting my time. He was angry at me for coming in, barging in on him like that. And finally I said, "Mark, I think you are from somewhere in the South." And he says, "I am. I'm from Tennessee." I said, "Tennessee, did you ever hear of a gentleman named John Ward?" I thought the guy would drop his cigarette right there on the sidewalk. "John Ward, the voice of the Vols." And he starts imitating this guy, who, by the way, died last week. At that moment, he and I connected because he loved this guy, John Ward. Long story short, that year I got a $50,000 order from him. Within 3 years, I built the account for $3 million. They're one of the biggest spenders in network radio sports. You might have heard them, Wrangler. It just shows you, you never give up. And you never know what will put the meals on your table. So that's my story. Thank you very much.